Lead and Copper Rule Overview for Non-Transient, Non-Community Water System School. Last July, the New Jersey Board of Education, also referred to as BOE, instituted a regulation requiring all public schools and school facilities receiving state funding to conduct lead sampling at all drinking water outlets located at the school facilities. These regulations differ from the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act Lead and Copper Rule. Public schools that are public water systems have to comply with both rules. The BOE lead sampling was required to be met by July 13, 2017. Future sampling will be required in 6 years to remain compliant. For any information on reimbursement for the BOE's lead sampling, please refer to Department of Education's website or contact them at leadtesting@doe.state.nj.us. As a result of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection (DEP) self-assessment, it was determined both the state and public water systems were not implementing the lead and copper rule in its entirety. Therefore, the first step was to call in all sampling plans. The information DEP is requesting is not new, as the requirements of the lead and copper rule have been effective since 1991. DEP would like to provide assistance with completing the Safe Drinking Water Act lead and copper rule requirements for your school. Some of the information already put together for the BOE lead sampling can assist you with your lead and copper rule requirements. History of the lead and copper rule. The lead and copper rule is a U.S. federal regulation which sets action levels for lead and copper in public drinking water. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, also referred to as EPA, first issued the rule in 1991. EPA's regulations were issued following studies showing that lead and copper have negative health effects. The lead and copper rule aims to reduce levels of lead and copper primarily through determining lead and copper levels at customer taps. Action levels. The federal lead and copper rule establishes action levels rather than maximum contaminant levels, also known as MCL for lead and copper. The current action level for lead is 15 parts per billion. The current action level for copper is 1,300 parts per billion. Compliance under the lead and copper rule is determined by the 90th percentile value. If the 90th percentile for lead and/or copper levels exceed the action level, water suppliers are required to take steps to install corrosion control or source water treatment and to educate their consumers on how to reduce exposure. This differs from the BOE's regulations that requires actions to be taken at every drinking water outlet that exceeds the lead action level. Health effects of lead and copper. As previously mentioned, the lead and copper rule was issued following studies showing that lead and copper have negative health effects. For example, exposure to lead can cause damage to the brain, red blood cells, and kidneys, especially for young children and pregnant women. Exposure to copper can cause stomach and intestinal distress, liver or kidney damage, and complications of Wilson's disease in genetically predisposed people. Sources of lead and copper. Lead and copper both enter drinking water mainly from corrosion of plumbing materials and are rarely found in source waters in New Jersey. Prior to 2014, 8% lead content was allowed in plumbing fittings and fixtures. As of January 2014, the amount of lead content allowed decreased to 0.25%. Some older schools may still have lead solder present or possibly even lead pipes. What size system am I under the lead and copper rule? Water systems are divided into 3 categories under the lead and copper rule. The size of the water system in question can affect how certain requirements apply to your system. For instance, under the lead and copper rule, large systems were required to install corrosion control treatment by January 1, 1997, unless deemed optimized, whereas small and medium systems only pursue the corrosion control treatment steps if they exceed an action level. In addition, the size of the water system will affect the number of sample sites necessary to obtain a representation of lead and copper levels within the distribution system. Water systems are to use non-transient populations to determine their size category. Federal citations. For further information pertaining to the lead and copper rule, the information on this slide lists the specific requirements and where they can be found within the regulations. Lead and copper tap monitoring. The two types of monitoring under the Safe Drinking Water Act Lead and Copper Rule are lead and copper tap monitoring and water quality parameter monitoring. Both types of monitoring are briefly discussed in this presentation. However, the lead and copper sampling plan requirements and water quality parameters sampling plan requirements presentations include further information in detail with regards to preparing for monitoring. Materials evaluation. Before lead and copper sampling, a materials evaluation must be conducted. The evaluation must be used as a tool in order to identify a pool of targeted sampling sites throughout the distribution system. The plumbing profile completed for BOE's lead sampling regulation is extremely similar and may be submitted in lieu of DEP's Materials Evaluation Survey for Non-Community Water Systems Form, BWSE 17. The size of the sampling pool will vary based on the size of the water system. The sampling pool of each water system must be sufficiently large in case of some of the water outlets selected become decommissioned. Further information pertaining sampling pool size recommendations will be discussed in a few slides. Materials evaluation resources. To identify what materials are present in the school, a water system's material evaluation shall review sources available to determine the presence of lead plumbing or solder in the distribution system. Some examples include distribution system maps and record drawings, capital improvement plans and/or master plans for the school building, and even utility records, including maintenance of the well and all historical documentation which indicate and/or confirm the location of plumbing renovations. Some additional sources available to determine if the interior plumbing has lead plumbing or lead solder joints include contacts within the school, documented interviews of school personnel via letters, phone survey, personal contacts, etc. Tools such as the lead check swabs can be used to assist in identifying the presence of lead in the interior plumbing. Note: non-transient non-community water systems may have a licensed plumber evaluate the plumbing materials of the distribution system if there are no records of materials available. All potential sampling site locations shall be identified. Additionally, the system shall collect such information where possible in the course of its normal operations. For example, checking interior plumbing materials when performing maintenance activities. Following any confirmation and/or modification to the interior plumbing materials, the lead and copper sampling plan shall be updated accordingly and the sampling pool re-evaluated to ensure that the required targeted tier sampling sites are being sampled. Monitoring schedules. All water systems must conduct standard lead and copper monitoring, which is every 6 months. After the system has completed 2 consecutive standard monitoring periods with no action level exceedances, the system may then proceed to annual monitoring. After the system has completed 3 consecutive annual monitoring periods with no action level exceedances, the system can then proceed to triennial monitoring, which means the reduced sample sites are sampled every 3 years. Note: DEP is not reducing systems from annual to triennial at this time. If the system incurs an action level exceedance, the system is required to return to standard monitoring as well as other requirements listed further in this presentation. If an action level exceedance occurs, in the event of a lead and/or copper action level exceedance, the following actions are required. Return to standard lead and copper monitoring. As previously mentioned, the system will return to standard lead and copper monitoring if currently on reduced monitoring. Notification to DEP and bulk purchasers. The system is required to notify DEP and its bulk purchasers within 48 hours. Conducting Water Quality Parameter WQP monitoring. The water system is required to conduct initial water quality parameter monitoring within 6 months from the beginning of the monitoring period in which the system exceeded the lead and/or copper action level. This is only the case if the system is not already conducting follow-up or optimal water quality parameter monitoring. Source water monitoring and treatment steps. The water system shall complete lead and copper source monitoring within 6 months of the end of the monitoring period in which the system exceeded the lead and/or copper action level. Samples should be collected from each entry point to the distribution system. Source water treatment may be required if results indicated elevated levels from the source. A source water treatment recommendation would be required to be submitted within 180 days after the end of the monitoring period. Treatment options include ion exchange, reverse osmosis, lime softening, or coagulation and filtration. After approval, treatment would be required to be installed within 24 months. Note, if elevated levels did not come from the source, a source water treatment recommendation is still required. This is a rare circumstance for a system because source water is rarely the source of lead and copper in New Jersey. Corrosion Control Treatment (CCT) steps. Water systems should use the WQP and source water monitoring data to recommend optimal CCT within 6 months after the end of the monitoring period during which it exceeds one of the action levels. The optimal CCT recommendation should be accompanied by the appropriate evaluation template for your system's population. These templates are available at the link presented on the slide. If the system already has CCT installed, the recommendation should include evaluating the current CCT installed. Public education. After a lead action level exceedance, the water system must deliver public education materials. All public education materials must be submitted to the state for review and approval prior to delivery. Then, the water system shall distribute public education within 60 days of the end of the monitoring period to all parents of students and school staff. However, DEP is asking that all public education is completed and submitted immediately along with the lead and copper sampling plan. For non-transient, non-community water systems, public education materials are to be posted on informational bulletin boards in public spaces or common areas in each building served by the system. Public education materials are also required to be distributed to each person served by the water system. For non-transient, non-community schools, public education materials should be mailed directly to the parents, legal guardians of all current students and school staff. Lead service line replacement. Water systems that fail to meet the lead action level after installing CCT or source water treatment are required to replace lead service lines. If the school has a lead service line, the service line shall be replaced. Systems may cease lead service line replacement following 2 consecutive monitoring periods below the action level. CCT steps. Following a lead and/or copper action level exceedance, once the system has WQP data and source water data, the next step is to determine the proper CCT to install. EPA has created guidance for determining the proper CCT based on the system's data. Following the installation of CCT, a system is required to conduct WQP monitoring again to demonstrate that the treatment is optimized. This is referred to as follow-up WQP monitoring. All action level exceedance and WQP monitoring requirements are not covered in this overview presentation. Further detail is included in the Water Quality Parameter Sampling Plan Requirements presentation. Analytical methods. There are specific analytical methods that must be used for lead and copper in WQP monitoring per the lead and copper rule. Sample analysis. A New Jersey certified laboratory is the only approved facility to analyze lead and copper samples. Whereas for WQP sampling, a New Jersey certified laboratory or an approved person can analyze WQP samples. Note, an approved person is still required to use an EPA-approved method for analysis. A guidance document pertaining to approved analytical methods for lead, copper, and water quality parameters is available on the DEP's website. DEP moving forward. As stated before, DEP is currently working with non-transient, non-community water system schools. It is understood that compliance with the BOE's lead sampling regulations was required to be met by July 13, 2017. Approximately 450 systems have been required to submit their plans and are currently under review. However, DEP has now additionally requested the submission of lead and copper sampling plans for approximately 58 schools. Other events happening at DEP include following up with systems that have existing lead action level exceedances, as well as running compliance for all requirements. The Lead and Copper Rule versus the Board of Education BOE regulations. It is important to note that there are some differences between the Federal Lead and Copper Rule and the BOE regulations. Remember, the state BOE regulations are based on EPA's 3 T's guidance. Pay close attention to these differences when conducting lead and copper rules sampling outlined in the following slides. Crosswalk for schools that are also public water systems. There is information for schools on our webpage that provides a comparison to both regulations for the convenience of public water systems. BOE plans submitted to the state in lieu of a lead and copper sampling plan will not be accepted. The sample container size requirements for lead and copper sampling is 1 liter. Any 250 milliliter sample container bottles left over from BOE's lead sampling regulations cannot be used. Designation of sample sites. When designating sample sites, taps used for human consumption, drinking water outlets are inclusive of drinking water fountains, bubblers, and coolers. Further questions should be asked when designating sites such as, are filters installed? Outlets with point-of-use treatment cannot be used as sampling sites. Potential sample sites may include teacher's lounge sinks. If there's a coffee machine, microwave, or cups present, this is evidence that the sink is used for drinking water or food preparation. Nurses' room sinks. These sinks may be utilized for students when medication is needed. Home economics classroom sinks. Students may utilize these sinks for cooking. And lastly, classroom sinks. If there are cups, bottles, or toothbrushes present, this is evidence that the sink is used for drinking water purposes. Kitchen sinks are acceptable sample sites if the school is using them to prepare meals. Keep in mind, some schools do not have meals cooked on site and rather have meals delivered to their facility for the students. In that circumstance, kitchen sinks should not be utilized as a sample location. Note, bathroom sinks are not considered drinking water outlets unless it is verified that they are used to consume water. It is important to ensure the system is using drinking water outlets meeting the tier criteria prior to using non-drinking water outlets. Tier criteria is discussed in the lead and copper sampling plan presentation. Be sure to verify that all sampling sites are still in commission. Due to the BOE's lead sampling regulations, some outlets may have been taken out of service if the outlet sampled above the lead action level. Therefore, use the sampling results from the BOE's lead sampling to assist in identifying sample sites. Sampling locations that were high and are still in service should be used for lead and copper sampling. Monitoring schedules. BOE monitoring may take place at any time of the year for compliance, whereas lead and copper rule monitoring is system-specific based on the schedule which is being followed. Systems generally sample from January to June and/or July to December. Any sampling under reduced monitoring, annual or triennial, is required to be conducted between June to September. Water stagnation. The required water stagnation time under the lead and copper rule is 6 hours minimum, unlike the BOE's lead sampling regulations of 8 hours minimum. However, a system may opt to still wait 8 hours if they would like. It is important that the water system documents how it ensures that proper stagnation time is met prior to sample collection. For example, a school may elect to lock the school building the evening prior to sampling and then collect the samples early the next day prior to the school opening. Many schools have chosen to sample on a weekend when there are no school events, prior to any school event, or sample on the first day of a school break, such as spring break. Pre-stagnation flushing is not allowed under the lead and copper rule. However, the sample should be representative of normal use. Therefore, it is strongly recommended to sample when the school is in normal operation. Do not sample when the school is on summer break or the first day the school opens after being closed for a long period of time. It is important to pay close attention to the water system's monitoring period. There are specific months in which you may sample. Distribution system map. Water systems are to identify all drinking water outlets available on a map of the school. The floor plan used for the BOE's lead sampling regulations can be used. This map helps locate the possible lead and copper sampling sites available to the school. Further details pertaining to the requirements of the distribution systems map are covered in the lead and copper sampling plan requirements presentation. For any questions or concerns, please contact the lead team at the water supply email or phone number presented on this slide. Note that other presentations, fact sheets, templates, and guidance documents are available on our webpage at the site listed.